Dom and see what we have on the question line. What do we have, Dom?
All right, we have Sue from Port St. Lucie. Sue is asking, is it better to do a cash out refinance or to get an equity line? I have a great credit if that matters.
Hey, Sue, that's a great question. And I'm assuming that's, following up on what we just talked about, right? Pulling some of that equity out to do some work around the house or pay off some bills. So there's not really an easy answer to that question, with the exception of what are you going to do with the money? If you just want to set it up, the equity line that is, so you have an emergency rainy day fund, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense because there are often no closing costs, if so, very little closing costs with an equity line of credit. And then you don't have a monthly payment with that equity line unless you actually use the money. So it's basically like a credit card that's collateralized by your property. It's exactly as it sounds, a line of credit. So if you just want an emergency rainy day fund, that may make sense. But if your thoughts with an equity line of credit are pulling money out to invest in the property and into your home, you're going to want to ask yourself, how reasonable is it that you're going to pay that off in a relatively short period of time? Are you going to pay that, pull a chunk out, redo the kitchen, and then do you think you can tackle that debt over the course of the next 5 years? Then it may make sense. But if you're looking at, big expenditures and you want to stabilize that monthly payment, because I guess one other thing I should probably touch on is typically the equity line of credit is often interest only, most of the time for about a 10-year period. But that interest rate floats. So we all know what's going on in the interest rate environment that we're in. They're going up. We are at the bottom of the interest rate environment from now forward. Yes, they were lower last year, but they're going to be higher next year, especially things like equity lines and credit cards because they're governed by other actions in the market. So anticipate that your equity line interest rate is going to increase over the time that you have it, and then do that payoff calculation. How long will it take you to pay it off? There's going to be, a break-even point or an inflection point, if you will, where it makes more sense just to roll it all into a fixed-rate mortgage product so you have that stable monthly payment. And from the sense that you're using it to reinvest in the property, theoretically gaining more equity, it's not at all bad advice to do that. And most importantly, that interest rate in a fixed rate product doesn't change. So think about it that way. There's some super enticing equity line rates out there right now because they're typically tied to the prime rate. And depending on your credit score, it may be prime plus, a point or prime plus 2 points. Sometimes it's prime minus. There's really not a lot of room on the minus side right now. But when rates were 6 and 8%, we saw prime minus equity lines. But yeah, I would need to have a discussion with you, a little deeper talk about what you want to do with that money before we were able to adequately assess whether it makes sense to do it in a cash out refinance or in the form of that equity line. And listen, there's nothing stopping you from doing both, assuming that you don't, pull out too much equity in the cash out refi. If there's additional equity left over later, you could always do that emergency rainy day strategy to put the equity line in place. But I have to also share too that if property values ever go down again, as they did in the crash, those equity lines get called. They'll turn it off. They'll turn the spigot off. If your equity line was approved to, 80, 90, 100% of the value as they were back then, and you might have $100,000 of unused credit in your equity line, and then your property values go down and the bank reassesses the risk level associated with that equity line, you might get the phone call that says, hey, we're going to close out your equity line. There's no longer enough equity in the property to justify it from the bank standpoint, or they may reduce it. So just all food for thought. And then lastly, I guess, let me share this. Most equity lines have what's called it's not a prepayment penalty, but it's a early termination fee. So if you take the equity line and you did some, quick renovations and sold the house to pay it off, that's where you'll pay the fees associated with the equity line. It's an early termination fee. But great question. I'm assuming it was following up the first part of the show. That's why I went into the conversation regarding what you're doing with it. If it's improvements, it may make sense just to do the cash out refi, roll it into a 30-year or 15-year mortgage payment, capitalize on these ridiculously low rates, and you've improved the value of your property. So hopefully that helps. I know there's a lot of people trying to figure out what the best way to use that equity is, and you hear me talk about it a lot. We talk about the REC loan, where people are, reducing, eliminating, and consolidating is what REC stands for. So we're taking your overall monthly your overall monthly debt expenditure, and including everything in it, your credit cards, your car payments, everything, and we're looking at the equity in the property. Does it make sense to take all of those payments and reduce them into one, maybe even eliminating them, but certainly consolidating them all into one payment? And does that dramatically reduce your monthly outflow? In the REC refinance world, it's less about interest rate. There's certainly that component. We don't want you to pay more interest than is unnecessary on your mortgage, but you're looking at basically a cash flow position in the REC refinance. And a lot of people are doing that with their equity and paying off those RVs that we all bought because we were going to travel the world during the pandemic and watch the beautiful sunsets in California. And, we all had these grandiose ideas that we were going to live off the grid. So if you've got that RV sitting there collecting dust along the side of your house and you want to pay that off, maybe the REC loan is the way to go. But hopefully that answered the question. I know there's often a lot more to the information we need to answer it, but yeah, if it's going to be something you pay off quickly, then the equity line may be the way to go. But we'll be back on the other side of this. 561-291-8569 is the Anytime hotline. 561-291-8569.
Hey, it's Mark Eitel here, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. And you've heard me talk about the valuation tool that we use in our lending practice almost daily. It's not quite an appraisal, but it's way more accurate than one of those online estimates. And we're happy to run one of those reports for you at no charge. Just visit freevaluereport.org. That's freevaluereport.org. Give us a little information about the property, and we'll be happy to send you your report. That's freevaluereport.org.
Here's another 5-star review.
We started our loan with a different company. They said we were approved, but at the last minute they told us there was a problem. I still don't know what went wrong, but thankfully our real estate agent told us about Mark. I was pretty stressed, but it's the perfect house, so we gave Mark a shot. He got it done. I'm not sure what was different, but I don't really care. We even got a better interest rate and with less money out of pocket than the first guy quoted us. It was a great surprise. Yes, I'm happy to recommend Mark and his Mr. Mortgage team.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at soflappraisal.com. That's soflappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. soflappraisal.com. And tell them you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
All right. So I am Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. And again, I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your weekend with us. Hopefully you'll get out and do some good stuff this weekend. But for now, we're super happy that you're settled in, maybe with a cup of coffee, or I don't know, maybe you had a long night last night and you still have a bottle of beer or a cocktail in your hand. I have no idea, but we're certainly glad that you're spending a bit of your weekend with us. So yeah, the Anytime hotline is 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569. And again, You can call or text any questions to that number. Dom, my producer, is manning that line now, and also it pushes to my office during the week. Or visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. That's mr.mortgage. So in the spirit of the show and keeping Dom busy, we're going to throw it over to him for another question. What do we have?
All right. I have Lonnie from Juneau. I see what seems to be too good to be true rates advertised on Facebook. Is this some kind of special program or just a scam?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of scams on Facebook, aren't there? I had a friend request from a ridiculously young and super attractive young lady who told me that I'm the man she always dreamed of, and she just needs me to help her make 1 or 2 mortgage payments. So, yeah, I can understand your hesitancy. There's a lot of interesting information on Facebook. So I guess to answer your question, it may not be a scam, but it may not be full disclosure, if you will. So oftentimes when a rate is advertised that just seems to be much lower than what you're hearing everywhere else, listen, we all want to believe what we want to believe, right? That 2% interest rate is still out there somewhere. And yes, I qualify for this magic special program. And there are some special programs out there, but usually not around interest rates. So it's most likely that you're not just reading deep enough into the disclosures, or maybe they just left them out, which is sad because that's illegal to do. But anyway, they may be charging points, and points, you can buy the rate down with origination or discount points. Or let's talk discount points for this conversation. What is a point? A point is a 1% of the loan amount. So on a $200,000 loan, 1 point is $2,000. So if you pay, typically you'll see in those ads 2 to 2.5 points. It'll say fine print on the bottom. That means you're going to pay a fee of 2 to 2.5% to buy that rate down. And what that means is, let's say the normal rate for that particular day, for that particular program was 3%. And I don't know, I'm just using round numbers for the sake of this example. And you see an ad for 1.99%, which is just a sexy way to advertise 2%. That's a full 1% difference. So you may have to pay 2 or 3 discount points to buy that rate down. And that's how oftentimes those ads work. And they're super enticing, right? You see that rate, and it's the rate that you saw in the paper 6 or 8 months ago. And we all want to think we're special. This is just for me. It's magic. I found it. But the reality is that most likely either it was intentionally left out by the advertiser, or it's just buried so deep in the fine print that you're not catching that. But if you're ever given a rate that seems too good to be true, my suggestion is just ask for a loan estimate, ask for a fee sheet, and ask them what fees are associated with this rate, because a lot of times we get caught up on the lowest rate. And we talked about it before, especially coming out of the environment of the last 2 years. There's that cocktail party rate where, you're leaning against the plate or against the bar, sipping your cocktail, overlooking the buffet with the plate of pigs in a blanket, and you're bragging to your neighbor that you got the 1.99% cash out refi with no points. So there's that vanity component to the interest rate, and we all associate that with the best deal. But oftentimes, more often than not, there's so many other moving parts to a rate that the lowest rate doesn't mean it's the least expensive program for you. So sometimes there's those upfront fees with buying that rate down. So I just share all that to encourage you to ask more questions. But I celebrate you for looking into it, because it's enticing. And if you're not buying yet, or you haven't purchased yet, I encourage you to do it. I know there's a lot of talk around the market. Is it still a good time to buy? And I pulled a report off the internet yesterday that was a home purchase sentiment index, and it was quite interesting, the topics that they were covering. So the first question was, is it a good time or a bad time to buy? And, not surprising because of prices and interest rates, 29% of people surveyed said it was a good time, but 67% said it was a bad time. And that's the part I mentioned was not surprising, because there's a lot of frustration surrounding people who feel they've been priced out of the market. And then another thing I found interesting was